All right, so next up is Confucius. So, Confucius, another sort of intersection of Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion. And Confucius had a whole lot to say about education. And there's not a whole lot of that in the book, but I encourage you to look it up. You've probably seen during your time in the school system, you've probably seen and come across a lot of quotes by Confucius that maybe you didn't even know were from Confucius, because he wrote a lot about education. And one of the first things that I want to point out here that I find particularly interesting is Confucius believed that if the government tries to get people to follow the law by threat of punishment, which is essentially what we do here in America, right? And if you ask the average person, why do you follow the law? Because most of us do. I mean, everybody speeds and, maybe doesn't come to a complete stop at a stop sign when there's nobody around. Right? I mean, there's certain laws that we've all kind of agree as a society are okay to break. But most of us are not murderers and rapists and arsonists and all these other horrible things. At least I hope not. So why is that? Why do you follow the law? And I think that's a worthwhile question to ask yourself. Now, a simple answer that a lot of people will give you is that they don't want to go to jail. They don't want to get caught. They don't want to pay a fine. They don't want to go to court, right? All that kind of stuff. Now, Confucius thought that if this is how the government tries to get its citizens to behave, right, not to harm one another, by just threatening punishment if they get caught doing it, then, he believed, the citizens would have no sense of honor and shame whatsoever in regards to their own behaviors. By contrast, he thought that the government should lead by example and should educate citizens on how to be virtuous. And if you do that, then they'll grow up and they'll become citizens that will choose to do the right thing and to follow the law because they're virtuous people, because they're good people, not because they're afraid of getting caught. Now, this is worth some consideration here because, first ask yourself, since our government tries to get us to follow the law by threatening punishment, do you think the average American has a sense of honor and shame? Now, I think it's hard to say yes if you watch reality TV, because people are willing to be famous for being horrible people, right? People are willing to be known for being promiscuous or violent or a hot mess or permanently wasted or having a sex tape or, right, not knowing who the father of their child is, right? People are willing to go on television and be famous for being, horrible people. Now, I'm not saying anybody that does any of those things is a horrible person, but to me, that shows not a whole lot of honor or shame with our behaviors, right? It shows that there's something that we care about more than that, and we're not usually embarrassed by our choices. And we maybe don't feel shameful when maybe we should, right? I'm not judging anybody's lifestyle. I'm just pointing out an observation. A lot more people end up on TV for drunken, promiscuous behavior than they do for, knowing a lot about physics or coming up with a new math equation or writing a great novel, right? So maybe we don't have a lot of honor and shame. I'll let you make your own opinion on that. But we certainly are probably not a society filled with, people who live virtuously on a consistent basis. Maybe that's debatable too. We'll talk about that throughout the semester. And we certainly don't have a government that leads by example, at least not by a virtuous example, right? Here in Illinois, how many of our top guys are in jail and, right? We don't necessarily have a very good track record of having virtuous politicians leading by a virtuous example. And our education system, for the most part, really doesn't teach virtue and morality, right? Unless you go to maybe like a religious school. There's certain rules that you're supposed to follow in school, and they try to get you to share and not to hit your classmates. But for the most part, we're not really taught morality, either by the government or by the school system. So that's really up to your parents any religious influences you have, any cultural, community-based programs that maybe are influencing your choices, right? The peer pressure around you from your classmates and your neighborhood friends and things like that. So we don't really have a government that leads by example. So it's up to you whether or not you think that that is a preferable way, right? Because you might say, well, it'd be great if they led by example, but if that also included the government being responsible for your moral education and upbringing, I think maybe there's a reason to be slightly hesitant about allowing the government to not only tell us what we can legally do and not do, but also what we should morally do and not do. And there's certainly a lot of overlap between the legal system and ethics, but not entirely, right? So, like, the government doesn't tell me that I can't have an affair, even though that's morally wrong. The government doesn't tell me that I can't lie to my best friend, even though that's morally wrong, right? So, do I want the government, guiding all those behaviors too? Probably not. But it's certainly interesting to think about is sort of what is the most effective way for the government to make sure its citizens can live together cooperatively and so that everybody can thrive and flourish. Another big thing that Confucius brought to the table here is the idea of the golden mean. And this idea about how we should be living our lives, what constitutes a well-lived life, Confucius's answer to that was a very common one, particularly in the ancient world. So right now we're still in Asia. We're going to be moving over to Greece, and we'll see that this idea was just as impactful in ancient Greece as it was in Asia. So the idea is that the best way to live life, the most fulfilling life, the most flourishing life, the most satisfying life, all those sorts of things, is to live a life of moderation. So you want to avoid the extremes in all things and go down the middle path, as opposed to kind of always going for like the epic, right, extremes. And when it works, it's really, really awesome. And when it doesn't work, it's a horrible failure, right? Which is the philosophy a lot of people like to live by, particularly in college. So the idea is, no, the golden mean, the life of moderation in between the two extremes. And this is an idea that we're going to see come back time and time again when we get to some of the Western guys.